Population growth and pyramids. Let's get to it. All right, so we talk about population growth. Talk about a couple of things. One, before we get started, to give you guys a quick fact. There are approximately 6.8 billion people that are on the planet Earth. Approximately 6.8 billion people. When we talk about population, a lot of times, though, you will not use raw numbers, or we do not use real numbers too often. Most of the time, we will discuss rates when we talk about the Earth's population. And that is because the population is growing so quickly, it's easier for us to talk about percentages of growth or decline than it is to talk about the actual numbers. Before we get started talking about the different types of percentages or the different rates, talk a little bit about demography. And the demography is the study of human populations. So demo is people, and ography is study of. And if you can break this word down, demo is people. Ography is the study of people. So when we talk about, and this was just bringing up with rates. When we talk about rates, we often use rates instead of absolute numbers to determine how frequently a population or demographic event is occurring. They show how common an event is and make it possible to compare countries that vary greatly in terms of population and size. I think I said something to that effect. The first rate we'll talk about is the birth rate. Taking a look at these kids or these little babies, that tells us a little bit about the birth rate. Of course, it has to deal with kids, but the birth rate is the number of births per year for every 1,000 people. The second type of rate we'll talk about is the total fertility rate, which is represented by these ladies, all of these pregnant ladies. The total fertility rate is the average number, or the average total number of kids each woman has in the country. So the total fertility rate is the average number of births per woman for a country. Now, this is a question that you guys will have to answer in your notes guide, so make sure that you are. Let's take a quick look at it. This is something that you will have to answer on your own. I will be checking. And the question is, taking a look at this map, we see that this is the countries that have the higher birth rates are in the purple. Countries with the lowest birth rates are in the blue. What can we hypothesize about countries with the higher birth rate? So just talking about what you guys know about with geography, what can we guess or theorize or hypothesize about the countries with the higher birth rates versus the country with the lower birth rate? So you have to put forth a theory and explain it. I'll check that the next time I see you guys. Population growth. There are a couple concepts that I want to review with you to make sure that are really important when we discuss population growth. The first one is life expectancy. So in life expectancy, that is pretty self-explanatory. That's just the average number of years that someone is expected to live. Now, it's based on a couple of things. It's based on your lifestyle. It's based on how you eat, statistics, where you live, the type of activities that you engage in. That's why I included this picture of bungee jumping. As you can tell, someone who frequently bungee jumps probably has a lower life expectancy than someone who does not frequently bungee jump. So this guy is probably having fun, but there's a strong possibility his life expectancy is much lower. He's not expected to live as long as someone who does not bungee jump. Mortality rate and the death rate. Now, these are the number of deaths per year for every 1,000 people. So when we talk about the birth rate is the number of births per 1,000 people, and the mortality rate or the death rate represent the number of deaths per year for 1,000 people. The infant mortality rate, these are the number of deaths per year for infants, for small children under 1 years old per 1,000 births. And what this graphic represents is going to this next point, is that the global population is growing because birth rates have declined. Death rates have declined. So what this graphic illustrates is that from 1900 to the year 2001, this is the number of people, the rate of deaths per millions of people. So we're averaging about 25,000 deaths per million people. It spiked in the early 1920s, close to 30,000 deaths per million people. But what we see is that as time has passed, we're now right at 5,000 deaths per million people. What that means is that we have more people on the worldwide stage in the world being born than we have dying because of advances in medicine, not as many wars, that sort of thing. Now, it's different for us in the United States. Ours is actually flat, or it's actually in the opposite. We have more people dying than being born, and we'll get into that in a little bit. This is another question that you guys have to answer. Which countries, and you can take a look at the map and figure this out, which countries do you think have a higher life expectancy and why? And which color countries do you think have a higher infant mortality rate and why? This is something that you guys have to do on your own. I will not give you the answer for it. It's just something for you to think about and just to kind of guess a little bit. Moving forward to the concept of population growth, there are about 2 or 3 things I want to make sure that we can take a look at. And this graph illustrates perfectly what we're talking about for what I want to talk about for population growth. What this is the average life expectancy by birth for each state for the year 2000. And we see how the population is growing between these different states: Virginia, the national average of the United States, Hawaii, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Maryland. And it measures the population growth, or how large the population is growing. You can tell Hawaii people have the largest lifespan. The total population lives close to 80 years old in Hawaii, in the states that were measured. And men live to about 78, and women live to about, the average woman in Hawaii lives to right about 83. So women in Hawaii live on average about 5 years longer than men, for any number of reasons. Things like men are generally have poor diets and more likely to do things like bungee jump. So let's move forward, though. We're talking about the annual growth rate. The annual growth rate is the change in population due to births, deaths, and migration. So, and we express that as a percentage of the population. So just know that the annual growth rate is an increase in population due to births, deaths, and all that stuff. Or it's the change in the population. I apologize. The annual growth rate is the change in the population, up or down due to births, deaths, or migration. Now, the natural increase, that is the rate of a population growth, and it is calculated by the difference between an area's birth rate and its death rate. That's kind of what we think of when we say natural increase. I want you guys to think about kind of like the net number. So when you take all the people who died in the area and you subtract it from all the people who were born, I know this sounds kind of morbid talking about this, but when you do that, the number that we have, that is our natural increase in population. And a good question to ask, I said, and we'll talk about this a lot with population, that why have deaths gone down in many places throughout the world over the past 200 years? Many different reasons: advances in medicine, less wars, people are generally wealthier, so improved healthcare, abundance of food and food supplies, advances in technology, and better living conditions. These are all reasons why people are lived longer for the past 200 years. When we talk about population growth, especially in wealthy countries, what we see is that we have a declining birth rate. So once again, we have a declining death rate, accompanied by a low birth rate. So when we talk about wealthy countries, we talk about countries like the United States or countries in Europe, first world countries that they're called. Those are the wealthiest countries in the nation. What you see is you have very few people, not as many kids are being born. And also what is happening is that not as many people are dying because people are living longer. So the birth rate and the death rate in these countries are equal. Like in the United States, our birth rate and our death rate are equal. When this occurs, our population does not grow. The only reason that we have actually had population growth in the United States is because of immigration. In other countries, like not of the United States, in developing countries like in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, you have a high number of births, also combined with a low number of deaths, because they do have access to medical technologies that we do. And this is leading to an increase in the population growth. So places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they are having a growth in population, where our population in the United States and Europe, places like that, our population is either staying the same or decreasing. As a result of this, the doubling time, the number of years it takes the population for doubling size, has been reduced to 25 years in some parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The concept of overpopulation is something I'd like to go over with you next. And overpopulation is kind of obvious, right? It's just when there are more people living in an area that can be sustained by the natural resources in that area. It's not just determined by the size of the area or by the population. It's actually used a lot of things, like the ratio of the population based on the sustainable resource. So it's on the amount of food that can be grown there. There are several things that causes overpopulation. One of them is an increase in birth rates. When you have more kids being born and you have less people dying, which is what we discussed, which is occurring right now in third world countries in Africa and Asia, Central America, are medical advances, because people are living longer, not as many people are dying. Also, in time, sometimes when you have an increase of immigration, when you have more people moving into a country, and a decrease in immigration with the E, when you have not a lot of people leaving, this can cause overpopulation. So what are some problems that can result from overpopulation? Go through them pretty quickly. But these are all pretty obvious, right? Of lack of resources, water, increased pollution, losing our forests, poverty, climate change, shortage of food, not as good of education system, crime, healthcare system, lack of housing for people. So there are some scientists feel that we are on the verge of overpopulating as a planet. And some, on the other hand, believe that we will develop technology that will keep us going. So it's only one way to find out, and that is to keep living, right? Negative population growth. And negative population growth, like, once again, this is a concept that is occurring in the United States as well as in other first world countries in the world, the Europes, Great Britain, places like that. This occurs when the annual death rate exceeds the birth rate. So you have more people dying every year than the kids are being born. Some of the problems that occur from a negative population growth is that you have a shortage of workers. You have a shortage of people to keep the economy going. Population distribution. The population distribution is just a pattern of where people live. And if you take a look, the population distribution is relative to an area's geography. And if you take a look at this, we tend to think that the earth is mostly made of made of land, but we're wrong. Only 30% of the earth is land. So all of these people have to live on less than 30% of the earth. The majority of the earth, 70% of the earth, is water, and we cannot live on it. So population distribution is important because we as human beings have a very small portion of the earth to live on. Now, Europe and Asia are the two most densely populated continents. This is Asia, and this is Europe. So Europe and Asia are by far the two most densely populated continents. More than 60% of the people that live in the world live in Asia. This is a cartogram that actually of the world's population, and it shows Asia. And actually, Europe isn't as bad. It shows how many people, 60% of the population of the world is right here in Asia. Look at us in the United States. Pretty small. And remember, a cartogram it shows us information. It reflects information by showing an exaggerated map. So this is just reflecting how many people actually live in Asia as compared to the United States and the rest of the world. Population density. That is the average number of people living in a square mile or kilometer of land, depending on where you live. Geographers, they use the population density to measure how crowded a country is. And the way that you find out the population density, you just divide the total number of people that are living in one area by living in a square mile or kilometer by this total land area. So what you'll find sometimes is that countries have the same number of people, but different land areas. So what that means is that they'll have the same number of people, but if a country has a lot of people living in a city where the other country has a lot of people living in the country, then you'll have different population densities. Now, population density, it is an average, so it does not account for uneven population distribution within the country, which is common. And the only thing that means is that it cannot account for the fact that it's an average number. So whenever you take the average, it's not a true number. You know this from math. An average is just the average of all the numbers. Taking a look at the population density of the United States, we'll see that if the darker colors are the higher population density, we see that we have the majority of our population is on the East Coast, California, a little bit of Florida. Not so much in the West, in the South. Not so much. Definitely not as much as you have in the East Coast. All right, that is the end. Make sure you answer the questions. Fill out your notes guide. Make sure you highlight what you need to, and I will see you in class.